So thank you everybody for being here today. If you've not already done so, I'm going to just ask one more time that you put into the chat who you are, your name, location, and institution, and why you came, what interests you in this topic. Today's presentations are one in a series that have grown out of the book Open Pedagogy Approaches, a project that was led by Kim Hoffman and Alexis Clifton. The book and today's presentations bring forward OER and OP approaches based in collaborations between faculty and librarians. So that's a key piece of everything we're doing, is this faculty-library collaboration. Today we have two of the authors with us, Stacy Katz and Jennifer Van Allen. Stacy Katz is a professor and open resources librarian, a STEM liaison at Lehman College, CUNY. She initiated, developed, and oversees the Open Educational Resources, OER, initiative for the college. Jennifer Van Allen is an assistant professor of literacy studies at Lehman College, CUNY as well. She has over 15 years of experience in education, ranging from elementary school to higher education. They will present Evolving into the Open, a framework for collaborative design of renewable assignments. They're going to help us understand what it means for an assignment to be renewable and how to create a renewable assignment. Our second presenters today include biology professor Dr. Jonathan Holtz and biology librarian Moriana Garcia. And I want to hold up here that Moriana, who's waving, is one of the key editors of this Open Pedagogy Approaches. They will present on their collaboration to establish an OpenStax textbook as a required book for a physiology course. As I noted, Moriana is one of the editors for the book Open Pedagogy Approaches. And I just want to add that she's also, and I can say this personally, being a U of R faculty member, a critical presence for OER and OP at the University of Rochester. So together, Jonathan and Moriana, our second presenters, are going to talk about empowering students to improve upon the OER by finding and incorporating openly licensed images, graphics, and videos. So the plan for today is that each team of presenters will speak for about 15 minutes. We'll also have about 5 minutes of questions, really for brief questions after each presentation. And if you don't mind putting your questions into the chat, so that way we can speak them out and get them answered in order. We're going to stop the questioning after 5 minutes to make sure we have time for the second presentation, and then return to open large discussion, ideally that pulls together the two presentations for the day. So with that, I will turn it to Stacy and Jennifer. I will stop sharing, and I really should have gone here. Sorry for that. And here we go.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And it's so nice to see everyone here and to have a discussion of open during this really kind of tumultuous time. It's kind of a relief to talk about some other things and find some refuge in this. So as Deb mentioned, my name is Stacy Katz. I'm an assistant professor in the library at Lehman College, and I'm presenting today with my colleague Jennifer Van Allen, who's also an assistant professor in our education department, and she's a professor of literacy studies. So we're both at Lehman College, which is part of the City University of New York. We're in the Bronx, although not currently, since everyone is home, but normally we would be in the Bronx. And this work really evolved out of our work in the CUNY OER initiative. So in 2016, Governor Cuomo gave $4 million each to CUNY and SUNY for work in OER. And we started to develop trainings within CUNY and really positions like OER librarians, which is what I am, started to develop within CUNY. And so as part of our trainings, we had different faculties who participate, and Jennifer was one of them. And as part of the trainings, we developed an open pedagogy series. And Jennifer was really interested in the idea of renewable assignments. So then we started to work together, and our process is what we're going to talk about today, of how we work together. And then we've got a little bit of a teaser at the end of some of the research that we've done that's been coming since we started working together, because We wrote this a while ago, so there's been actually an evolution of some of the research that we've been able to assess some of what we've done.
Yes. So like Stacy was saying, we started our work together through that initiative. I had no idea what OER was or what it was about. And so Stacy was a really good advocate at Lehman College with the initiative. And as I got into the process and talking with Stacy, I learned more about open pedagogy, which really aligns with my teaching philosophy. And so that's how we started to work together on designing a renewable assignment for one of my courses.
All right, so Jennifer put a link to the presentation if you want to follow along. It does have some of like my random notes at the bottom, so feel free to either look at those or ignore them. Images are also linked. So if you're on this slide, for example, if you wanted to get to the book or to the chapter, those are both linked from those screenshots. So we tried to make it a little bit easier to get to some of the resources. Yeah, the book was a really good opportunity for us to document the process of what we were doing and really discuss our process, but also we have, as we go along, you'll see in each step of the redesigning the assignment, we have considerations for implementation, as well as different roles that both librarians and faculty can take on within this process. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well as we go through kind of the steps that we're taking.
So we'll start by talking about open pedagogy and how we conceptualized it. So open pedagogy reconceives the notion of who creates knowledge and provides a pathway to empower students as creators. So within a course, within class activities, you encourage students to not just consume knowledge that's being given to them by the professor or what they're learning from books, but you engage them in actually creating this knowledge in order to share it with others. So students take a less passive role and a more active role in their learning. And as they're doing that, you're inviting them to share the work that they're creating in whatever form it happens to be in. There's lots of different forms of open pedagogy, but you invite them to openly license it and share it with others more publicly. They may choose not to, and that's absolutely okay, but it's that act of actually having them create and then inviting them to share it more publicly with others, whether it's the class, whether it's students who are taking that course, or even with a more global community. So within teacher education, we thought that this works really, really well because sharing is caring in education. And as a former PK-12 teacher, I always borrowed things from others. That's what education was all about. And so if we're already doing that, and many of you may be familiar or have heard of Teachers Pay Teachers or seen work from Teachers Pay Teachers from kids that you may have and work that they are sent home with. Well, Teachers Pay Teachers, the things that are on there are licensed under a traditional copyright, meaning you have very little freedom to change it, to adapt it to your students' needs. And within education, all classrooms are different, all contexts are different. And so this idea of open pedagogy and creating resources that educational resources that others can use and adapt is really, really powerful and really encaptures the whole spirit of education as a whole and teaching as a whole. And so that I thought was a really nice link in order to not only engage my students as creators of educational resources, but then to also encourage them to take resources of others and adapt and share without this copyright restriction.
So as we discussed open pedagogy broadly, we talked about students as creators and empowering them, but we didn't know, a way to really go through that process. And this article by Wiley and Hilton really helped us think through how might we consider turning an artifact that exists, an assignment that creates an artifact, into one that's renewable. So that's really where the process came out of, was looking at this chart and thinking about how can we make this approachable for faculty and say, you already have an assignment where a student creates an artifact. What are the steps that we need to go through in order to make that renewable? And we really like that this put it in conversation with also authentic and constructionist assignments, that assignments don't just exist as disposable or renewable, that there is sort of a continuum out there. of what's being done. And in fact, like Jennifer and I were talking when we were talking about this presentation again and trying to remember all the things we did in this process, I was reminded that like many of my favorite assignments as an undergrad and in grad school were either authentic or constructionist. That those are the ones I remember the most. They're the ones that are more meaningful to me. There weren't open licenses then because I am a little older than that, but they were authentic or constructionist assignments that really developed that kind of meaningful experience. So, we talked about how we wanted to create those assignments that build intrinsic motivation, that where they can produce work that they see as meaningful, that's meaningful to others in the future, particularly in teacher education. That made a lot of sense to us, that we wanted them to learn how to build on these resources, how to find them as well. So part of our process was also like, I went into Jennifer's class and taught about Creative Commons licensing because that was something that would be important for teachers to know, which it was their last semester and none of them had heard of Creative Commons licensing. They hadn't heard of OER Commons, but they all knew teachers pay teachers. So these are things that we now know about that we have to work towards in our teacher education programs.
And I should add that these are in-service teacher candidates. They're seeking an advanced certification degree. So they had already been through a pre-service teacher education program, and some of them even had a previous master's, and most of them had never heard of OER before. So we're starting with the end in mind. The original assignment, we're going to share the renewable assignment first, and then our process for creating this. And so it started out, the assignment that I originally had was, I asked my students to create an inquiry-based unit. The course is a language literacy and educational technology course, which I thought fit really nicely because they're learning about digital literacy skills, building their own digital literacy skills, which we know is important when engaging with OER, and also learning about how to support their own students with digital literacy skills, the students that they're working with. And so it was an inquiry-based unit. I asked them to design a unit, and then I added on later, try it out with your class. So when I was rethinking this assignment and talking with Stacy about it, I said, well, why am I making them create something from scratch when there's already all these great resources out there? And learning to adapt is something that's really important for teachers. Adapt, remix, and that sort of thing. So that kind of came about through OER. So we adapted the assignment, reconceptualized the assignment so that it's no longer they have to create something, and it's no longer an inquiry-based unit that they have to create. Now they can search on OER Commons, they can see the resources that are out there, and they're free to design their own or adapt or remix an existing resource as long as it supports their students' digital literacy skills. So originally it was an authentic assignment because it was created and it had value to others outside of the class. The redesign made it a renewable assignment because now they were freer to create any kind of educational resource, whether it was an online module, which was very, very useful for some of them moving into online education, or a series of lesson plans or a unit. They could create a collection of technological resources that they could use throughout their classroom with many lessons on how to use that. They could create exemplar models of projects so that their students had ideas of what something might look like that they wanted them to create. And so you can see it was a lot freer. One student even created an open book chapter for her first grade mathematics class, so with multimodal elements in it. So it was a lot more freer. They could use what was already existing and adapt it or remix it or remake it for their own class. And then they were invited to publicly share it with others. So thinking back to those 4 questions that Wiley and Hilton posed to see if it's a renewable assignment or not, they were asked to create new artifacts or revise and remix existing OER. They were creating an artifact that had value beyond the learning of themselves because they implemented it with their class and learned from that. They were invited to publicly share their new artifact or revised and remixed OER. Now they were required to share it with everyone in the class. So everyone had access to each other's resources. Beyond that, we invited them to share it on OER Commons, but they weren't required to. And they were invited to share it with an open license. Not all of them chose to do so, but some of them did. that is the end assignment in mind. So then thinking about how our process, how did we get to this? Well, we first started by analyzing and classifying the original assignment, which thinking through it, using reflective questioning, Stacy helped me to think through that assignment as a librarian and the knowledgeable OER person. She helped me to think through, okay, well, what is the purpose of this assignment? What are your learning goals and how does this fit into your current course? And so that reflective dialogue that we had really helped me to make some intentional decisions about this assignment as we redesigned it. So she said, how could we shift this to sharing more openly, to encouraging students to share it with an open license.
Which for
And
all
that,
the librarians out there, these are our skills of like reference interviews. Like it's not so different to ask those kind of questions, but to shift it a little bit about the assignments and the goals of the assignment.
Mhm. And the course too, connecting it to those course goals as well was really important. So that was really the first step. Analyze that assignment and classify it according to Wiley and Hilton's chart. Then from there, we considered what was meaningful. What was a meaningful contribution to education? Well, any kind of resource, whether it's handouts you can give students, whether it's lesson plans, whether it's an online module students can go through, anything like that is really, really valuable for other teachers in the field, not only for my students in creating it, but also for others in the field. So that important step of thinking about what is a meaningful OER contribution for education and how does that fit within this course and the learning goals of the course was really, really important. So first we analyzed the assignment, then we started thinking about how is this valuable or what would be more valuable to others.
Yeah, the meaningful OER contributions piece is really about thinking who is your audience when you're designing the assignment that the students are creating that artifact for. So who are they going to really be contributing to? Is it other students? Is it people in a profession? Given that this is a professional degree, it made sense for them to contribute to their profession, to think of this really as growing their professional identity as well, which had some interesting implications we later learned for thinking about them being open with it as well. But, that was the piece of it, that what's meaningful in one discipline is going to be not going to be meaningful in another. So it's really thinking through that disciplinary contribution. And Jennifer and I looked at different examples of, the open anthology of literature and things like that, or the psychology test banks, but within education, what really made sense was to produce artifacts that could be shared with teachers. And then that also actually led into step 3 of thinking about the tools and repositories. So where are you publishing this and where are you sharing it? And for Jennifer's course, what really made sense was OER Commons. First, it was considering, what do we have access to? At CUNY, we're lucky that we do have a fair number of tools and repositories at our disposal, because we have CUNY Manifold, which is a publishing platform. We have CUNY Academic Commons, which is a WordPress installation. So we have a few different places where faculty can publish OER. We have our institutional repository. We have places like that, but we also have a hub on OER Commons. And given that OER Commons also houses a lot of K-12 resources, we felt like that was the appropriate place for the students to learn about OER Commons. It became a place where they could also search OER Commons and find resources, and then also a place where they can share it out with others. So that was why OER Commons felt like the right space for us for this assignment in particular. When I went into Jennifer's class to teach about Creative Commons licenses, they really had not heard anything before about OER Commons. And we sort of pitched it as like a free teachers pay teachers. And they were like, oh, sure. Well, that I'm into. Like they were very excited about that notion because that was so familiar to them. But they all are spending money on teachers pay teachers as well. So we wanted to move them off of that idea that they needed to do that. And then, when I went into the class, we also talked about sharing openly and what that means, that they were going to be asked if they wanted to put a Creative Commons license on it. We did provide an option where they could share in the class Google Drive. That was kind of the requirement of the assignment, that they share with the class, or they could also choose to share it more openly. And we talked a little bit to them about what sort of are the considerations when you think about Creative Commons licenses. So we showed them, Jennifer's syllabus had intentionally had, with all her readings, she listed the Creative Commons license. So we went through and compared those on each of her readings so that they could see the different licenses that they'd already been exposed to without even noticing it. And then we talked a little bit, if you're familiar with Catherine Cronin's work, of intentionally negotiating openness. So will I share openly at all? Who will I share this with? Who will I share as? And will I share this? So we talked through some of those issues of, will you share this? What are the implications of that? Will you share it as yourself? And thinking through if they wanted to. And we did conduct research on this as well. So they were participating in a research study as they were participating in the assignment. So we found that some of them did not want to. And then later in our interviews found that they regretted not sharing openly, actually, because the assignment went so well when they actually got a chance to practice it with their students, that for them, they needed to actually work through some of the issues of the assignment before they felt comfortable, because this is their professional identity. So that was interesting and a little bit different than some of the things we've seen in open pedagogy projects at the undergraduate level.
Yeah, so designing intentional negotiations for openness was built into this discussion, this ongoing discussion that Stacy and I were having about the assignment. How are we going to provide options for students who don't want to share openly, for those who don't want to assign a Creative Commons license? And it worked out in this particular assignment that those that didn't want to share, if they didn't want to put a license on, they just said, I am not choosing a Creative Commons. I do not choose to select a Creative Commons license for my work. But they still had access to each other's in the resource folder. So they can still go back and use it, but they're not sharing it more publicly. Whereas others decided that they wanted to put a Creative Commons license on it. And so designing that and intentionally building in these opportunities, or thinking through, what about the students who don't want to do it? If you're creating an open book chapter, let's say, as a class, what about those who don't want their work in there at all? What are they going to how are they going to complete the assignment? Because you can't penalize them for not wanting to share. There's lots of reasons for that. And so that was a big piece. They had to decide if they wanted to share as a teacher or if they wanted to share as a student at Lehman College. And so that personal identity piece was also important. And then we moved into step 5, which was really just finalizing and reclassifying the assignment. We should say that this is an iterative process. You're going to go back and forth in the steps. So it's not step 1, I'm done. Step 2, I'm done. It doesn't work like that. It's kind of this back and forth piece. But the final step to really solidify it, I finished up the assignment description and the rubric, and I sent it to Stacy. And I said, okay, is this clear? First of all, which is always a really good step. She viewed it through the lens of a student. And then, is this a renewable assignment? And we reclassified it according to those steps. So while this seems like a pretty straightforward step, it was actually one of the most collaborative times that we were working together as we rethought the tools, we rethought the openness, we rethought, is this a significant, a meaningful OER contribution that they're creating? And that was our steps that we went kind of back and forth to it. So if you have any questions about it, we've added on, this is some of the work that we've done continuing on, and some resources that we have for you if you want to read more about this work or you want to get into this yourself. Stacy worked with a colleague in creating a workbook that has these steps, and you can kind of follow through that in that workbook. And then there's our findings from our study if you're interested in that, and some more about the class if you're interested in that, and how we redesigned the entire course, not just the assignment.
So I'm going to say thank you very much. We do actually have a few minutes for some quick questions. I'm seeing a question from John. What was the breakdown of students who agreed to OER versus those that didn't choose that designation?
So I'm just pulling up actually our poster from OE Global that has those results on there. So you can either open that yourself, or you can hopefully, it's a little small because it's a little tiny there. But you can see actually our findings from the study of it. And so
One third, I get 1/3. So there were 9 students who chose to participate out of the 12 that were enrolled in the class, and 1/3 chose to share openly with a CC license, but only 1 actually shared on OER Commons.
So the next question is, am I missing something about teachers pay teachers? It seems like most teachers' contracts do not give them an exemption to the works for a hire doctrine, so they don't own the copyrights on their curriculum materials. So how does the individual teacher have the rights to sell their works? Isn't the whole TPT platform based on a false interpretation of copyright law?
Stacy, I defer to you.
I mean, I think from what I've been reading about teachers pay teachers, because I find it kind of fascinating, it seems like there's actually these teacher influencers who are not necessarily working in districts anymore, who are creating most of the materials that get sold, and they make it kind of look snazzy and fancy. So they may actually own some of their materials, but I know there have been times where things are taken down because they don't own what they're putting up on there. But I think they put out, I forget what it was, but there was some statistic that like so many teachers right now, especially during the pandemic, are actually buying things on Teachers Pay Teachers. I mean, even just like anecdotally, like one of my husband's cousins like posted on Facebook that she was even like doing a GoFundMe to raise money to buy for Teachers Pay Teachers, like right now during the pandemic. So it's just something where everyone is trying to get the resources they can. Jennifer and I are actually working with the New York City Department of Education to try and run some more OER trainings with New York City teachers. So hopefully we'll get IMLS funding for that, because it's not something that's taught in teacher education programs yet. And it's not something where anyone has anything like going on in the districts yet. So that's something we're working on. But I don't know the logistics of exactly who owns their copyright within New York City schools. Teachers do have a fair amount of freedom within New York City schools. So they may actually have some copyright and not work for hire.
And honestly, I don't think that teachers really think about it, because even when we were doing the OER class with my students, they didn't even understand traditional copyright laws. So they might be breaking something somewhere, some policy somewhere, and really not knowing about it.
So this seems like a nice moment to say this is leading to a bigger and interesting conversation, and possibly an area for more investigation. And I'm going to, very interesting. Thank you again very much, Stacy and Jennifer. And we're now going to switch to our next presenters. And that's, again, Jonathan Holtz, Moriana Garcia, use of digital reusable assignments to supplement and support OER adoption and increase student engagement in a human physiology course.
So I just wanted to take a moment to thank the organizers for having us, and to thank all of you for being here. I really appreciate your time and your attention, and it is an honor and a pleasure to be speaking with you today. I will also say, logically, it made sense for this presentation to come second. But if I would have known about the charisma and enthusiasm and experience of Stacy and Jennifer, I would have been more, that's a tough act to follow, you know, so that's a high bar set, but we will just go on as best we can. So Deb read the title. I think that it is pretty descriptive of the main thrust of this presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, so about the collaboration. So yes, my name is John Holtz. Probably the most salient information about me to this presentation is I am an associate professor of instruction. So I don't have bench research responsibilities, but I am encouraged to do pedagogical research or participate in activities that will improve my teaching and student outcomes. And then also I will say the classes that I teach are upper level anatomy and physiology courses. So they have some prerequisites, and they're primarily taken by upper class students. Dr. Garcia was introduced earlier. She's the STEM and Scholarly Communications Librarian. It is an unbelievable pleasure to collaborate with her, and she is a wealth of knowledge and expert in communicating that knowledge and resources. So this project is a culmination of our first collaboration in the field of OER. We started well in advance of the potential adoption of OER materials so that we could sift through what was available, evaluate its potential efficacy for the class, the quality of the material, for example, the scope and breadth, and to find additional supplementary materials if they were out there. We also early on started to talk about assignment, design, and assessment of student outcomes using these materials. So we're going to have a little bit of background information here. Moriana originally came to me with quite a bit of research showing that the adoption of OER can decrease students' costs while increasing text utilization and beneficial outcomes. And not just across the board, but also greater impacts were seen for students in underrepresented minorities or lower socioeconomic status as well. And that making strides in those areas, if we were able to maintain the quality of the text, that was the primary motivation for this adoption. And OER actually first came to my attention I should say, sorry, that we were at the University of Rochester with from a presentation from a visiting educator talking about this, but that was through some library outreach. And also Moriana and I, we did an interview. I think you can see it. The link is provided here, where we talked about some of our, in a little bit greater depth about the motivating factors, the impetus behind this adoption, and also some of our early statistical findings. And then I think also it wasn't easy to access high quality OER ancillary materials, especially, you know, I don't want to speak for any other province, but in the realm of physiology, some of these sort of protracted, complicated molecular mechanisms are best understood by the students using videos or very well designed images. And it was difficult to find these in the most readily available OER. Okay, so Moriana did some calculations you can see here. Scientific textbooks, I consider them to be very expensive, and I know when I was a student, the cost was an impediment to access to the textbook. It's quite expensive. And you can see here, this is the red arrow pointing to the text that the open text that we adopted, Anatomy and Physiology, provided by OpenStax. And that is available to students online at no cost. They do have the option to purchase a print version if they would like, but even that is much less cost prohibitive. Okay, so my initial concern was that the quality of the new text would be commensurate with what we were trying to do in this upper level course. So I just wanted to give some full disclosure. In addition to this OpenStax textbook, we also use a non-OER but multi-user text that's available to the students through the University of Rochester Library, and it's free to them. So it's not open text, but it's free to the student. And just, you don't need to get bogged in the details here if you want, but you can see on the left is an image from OpenStax, and on the right is an image from this other text, the Byrne and Levy Physiology. And you can see this text allows me to go to the requisite degree of detail that I think is commensurate for this upper level course. just a little bit of information. So in the spring of 2019, we were thinking about making this switch. So I asked some questions of the students, and you can see about 30% did not purchase the text, and maybe around 45% of students cited the cost of the text as the reason for not purchasing it. And for whatever reason, the usage frequency, very infrequently to never, was around 60% for the textbook. And then between semesters, we changed to the no-cost open and multi-user text, and again questioned the students, and the probability of assessing the text, they self-reported that this would increase their likelihood of doing that. And interestingly, the students, compared to previous classes and previous texts they'd used, about 95% of them rated the text as commensurate or improved quality, and about 80% of students said that the no-cost textbook made a significant decrease in the financial burden that they were feeling, and about what do we see here? 25% or so said that it made no change. Okay, so the ancillary materials on the left here, just speaking to the quality of them and the utility. On the left, we can see this is an image from the supplied PowerPoints with the OpenStax, the ancillary materials that they supply. If you go into their text and copy the image, it is of somewhat significantly higher quality, but it's time consuming to do this. And compared to our previous textbook, the Mary Evan Home AMP text, the images are not necessarily as dynamic. So after adopting this textbook, we thought about, or I guess we can say the goal was, with somewhat of a dearth in ancillary materials or the quality thereof, the goal was to have students complete a renewable assignment that can find or generate open educational resources or ancillary materials. And so by doing this, so as Stacy and Jennifer very strongly alluded to or mentioned, we thought this would increase the depth of student engagement with the material. It would also be less burdensome to crowdsource the students looking for improved materials. And then with the potential for perpetuation of the assignment, it would increase the perceived utility to the students. So we came up with two types of assignments. There were three throughout the semester. There were 3 individual assignments where the students would research a major topic or theme from that module in the course. And as part of that assignment, they would locate images or videos that would demonstrate or inform upon that principle. And then at the end of the semester, there was a group project where students worked together to create or to generate their own novel media to convey information about a topic or theme from that module. So there were other components to this assignment. I quite imaginatively titled them topic investigation reports. This one was on resting membrane potential, and you can see the student found an image that conveyed information about that. And it's a static picture here, but this is actually a video that also speaks to this topic. And the students, I can't remember if it was 1 or 2 bonus points, but if the image and video that they found were open license, then they would receive a bonus point for that. So here's the prompt for the group project. For this report, you must work in a group of 3 to 4 students. As a group, you will work collectively to generate some media that conveys the information of your topic. This could be a simple figure or video, but additional possibilities include comic strips, podcasts, songs, or other media. Okay, and the students availed themselves of those suggestions. They came up with comic strips, posters, lectures, songs. The songs were great. They were incredible. Podcasts or infographics or diagrams. You can see here a capture of a student giving their own lecture on the topic to a classroom, and the students here, you can see they're enjoying themselves, and they are acting in a way where they're asking planted questions to demonstrate their understanding of the topic and to flesh it out. And these group projects, I think maybe it's okay to say that there was mixed enthusiasm for working in groups, but the result was incredible. The students, what they generated, you know, was quite engaging and interesting, and not only demonstrated a strong grasp of the topic to which they were assigned, but also tremendous creativity, you know, and artistic ability. Here we can see another example. So just to compare, on the left you can see a diagram explaining the parts and function of the digestive system, and on the right here you can see a group project where they created this flow chart and diagram to demonstrate similar principles, you know. And then we'll talk a little bit more later, but just to have these additional resources, you know, for students talking to future students in their own words, or student to be able to have some options of type of material to engage with, or some consilience or redundancy, I think that these will be valuable future resources. So the group project grading rubric, there were two parts. The other part was how well they demonstrated their understanding of the topic. That was half of the assignment, and the other half was the use of medium. So to encourage exploration and not to discourage creativity, you can see the rubric here. I hoped that it would be appropriate to encourage the students and not to dissuade them or to make this onerous on them. So just generally, the question, is the medium appropriate for the audience? Is the presentation clear? Does it serve to convey the information on the topic? Did they choose a medium that was compelling or interesting or engaging? And does the composition of the project demonstrate sufficient effort, commensurate effort?
Well, here is where I enter. As John said, my name is Mariana Garcia, and I'm the librarian responsible for supporting biology. So our library support to the class, I was embedded in the Blackboard environment, so I had access to all the materials, the class, and as John says, we started discussing very early about what we were gonna do, what we were gonna use or had to acquire. The library support during the course uses a kind of fourth-pronged approach. First, we had an in-person class visit very early in the semester. I think it was the second class in the semester, or the first, I'm not sure. And of course, it was an introduction to the librarian as someone that could support them during the course. And it was an introduction to the course guide. So we had a LibGuide, a web page with all the information that they would need to do the assignments. And I also demonstrated in class how to find open access materials in the library collection using our own catalog and interface. Then we had, of course, the asynchronous library support. Here is the course guide, and it was linked to Blackboard, so students have immediate access from Blackboard. In the LibGuide, we had tutorials on how to find open access materials, not only on the library collection, but also in the internet using advanced search in Google. Also, there was a PDF tutorial on how to find open access Creative Commons licensed resources in YouTube. The LibGuide also had copyright information, so linked to our copyright guide, and Creative Commons licenses, and also information on multimedia tools that they could use for the group assignment, with examples of tools, examples of videos, podcasts that they could reflect on and model. The other support was one-on-one consultations. I immediately, on the first class, I told them, I'm open to your consultations. Send me your email, send me emails with the links to your resources. I want them, they say you want an extra point, I can check on the rights for the resources that you want to upload. And I had several consultations. It was pre-COVID, so face-to-face and email, both. And some was about finding copyright information on the scholarly resources that they wanted. They wanted to verify that they were open. Other was how to find those resources in general, depending on the platform that you were using. And also some students provided very, very good feedback about, oh, how do I feel about having to do this work? And it was very positive. Then we had near the end of the semester, when they started to work on the group assignment, we had a required 30 minutes extracurricular class for all students. They had to register. And in this class, we talk about the media tools for the group assignment. And it was here where we talk about the copyright, their rights as authors, and that they could choose a Creative Commons license for their work if they wanted. And we provided them with documentation. Students, they were required to attend the class, but not required to fill the copyright and Creative Commons license documentation. So they were not required to share, but they had to attend the class and learn about their options. This is the student release form that we used. The university, because of FERPA regulations and privacy, if we want to share student projects, we need to have their permission. And here is the main information in our form. You have an access in the link on the materials. It has 4 parts. It had 4 parts. The FERPA part is the permissions to the University of Rochester to share their work, and permissions for third-party access if we want to use any other platform. What we added, or I added, it was a part on CC licenses where the students could choose a CC license for their works, and also a name choice, because they could choose to be anonymous, to share this anonymous or with a nickname or their own name. So this was the part that I added to our regular FERPA release form. Here are some numbers. So students' response to request for permission to reuse the assignment, 48% gave permission to the university and assigned a CC license, while 32% never responded. So they didn't. But from the others, 9 didn't give permission, responded but says no permission, and 11 added a CC license, but they did not sign it on the FERPA part, which is problematic and could be risky. So I'm going with the 48%. And here is the distribution of the CC licenses. 13 students choose a public domain, so that you don't even have to cite me. I completely share. This is my gift to the world. 36 students choose CC BY. And then we have a distribution on the other. One student, I didn't give in the form an option for no derivatives because I said the purpose of this is to create a material that the professor will reuse. So we need to be able to use create derivatives. But one student actually added manually the option and he marked no derivatives. So, okay, very, very engaged in copyright. So here I return to John so he can give you some information about our future directions. Thank you.
So going forward, a couple of things that, we're always looking for suggestions. So if you have any, please offer them. But one of the things is to right size the topics and to target them to the most challenging material to make sure. I know that early in the semester, I had some students do some topics that would be beneficial later in the semester, but may have been overly challenging so early on. And then the group project, as I said, there were mixed reviews. Some students loved it and some students felt very negatively towards it. But one thing that the students commented on was the timing. So this group project was towards the end of the semester, and I think we're going to revisit the logistics of it to make sure that the project is not overly burdensome, or so it's not at the same time as their final exams or when their classes are wrapping up. And then the group selection process. So I allow the students to choose their own groups, and for the most part that was fine. But for a few students that presented a challenge or an impediment of some kind, so I'll have to, I've been exploring some various ways of putting the students into groups. And now that we have these materials, so, Stacy and Jennifer have given me the idea, maybe we can have students continue to interact with previous resources, but I need to think about how best to incorporate what the students have done. It's easy to have a repository for students to look at or think about, but how can I use them in my lectures, and how can I encourage students to use them and to engage with them? And then interestingly, we want to assess the assignment efficacy. So students have reported that they agree with this. The studies seem to indicate that students engaging in this way with material would be beneficial, but we want to go back and investigate their performance on the exam to see if students who researched a certain topic do better on questions related to that topic on the exam. And then maybe to see, I'm starting to, does this matter? So if there's a cumulative portion of the final exam, to see if retention, if student retention about their previous topics is improved by having done this type of assignment.
And on my part, I will separate the FERPA permission, which is actually individual. We need that signed by the students individually, from the CC license decision, which is the group decision. Because what happens, I use it in a form, one form per student. So I ended up sometimes with 5 different types of license for the same project. One is selected by each student. And of course, I told them that I would select the most restrictive one as the blanket license. But I would prefer if they do the discussion and choose only one in the future. So I will separate that part in next iterations. And here are just the materials, and you will receive a copy to the slides, and you have a copy in the chat.
So I'm going to say thank you very much, Mariana and John. We're actually now at 2. So I'm going to encourage people to reach out with their questions. There are a few very good questions in the chat. And this was certainly interesting to me. And I do want to encourage people to come to our future events. Our next presentation, you can see, is upcoming, and hope you'll be able to make it. So thank you, Jennifer, Stacy, John, Mariana, and everybody for being here today. This is very exciting to me, so thank you. Have a good day, everyone.